A single dad rushes to help a woman trapped in a wrecked car on a snowy road, unaware she's the reclusive heiress of a billion-dollar legacy that will upend everything he thought he knew about life, love, and second chances. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The snow fell sideways in thick sheets, blanketing the two-lane country road like a forgotten quilt. Jack Harlow squinted through the windshield of his aging pickup, wipers smearing more than clearing. Owen, curled up in the back seat beneath a puffy blue coat, had long since drifted to sleep, lulled by the steady hum of the heater and the soft country radio barely audible over the wind. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter as his headlights cut through the swirling snow, illuminating empty road and frosted trees. He'd stayed late at the shop, patching up Mrs. Kellerman's old Buick for half the price she could afford, and now all he wanted was home, hot soup, warm blankets, maybe 5 hours of sleep before it all started again. Then he saw it, a glint of metal, skid marks carving wild arcs across the snow. His heart dropped. Just ahead, angled into a shallow ditch, was a white SUV passenger side caved in from where it must have slammed into a tree. The taillights glowed dimly, blinking like a dying heartbeat in the storm. Jack pulled over without thinking, killed the engine. "Stay in the truck, buddy," he said softly, not sure if Owen could hear him. The cold hit hard as he stepped out, wind slicing through his coat. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he jogged toward the wreck. The windshield was cracked, spider-webbed with ice, and the driver's side door hung ajar. "Hello?" he called out, voice nearly lost to the storm. A faint groan answered. He found her slumped over the steering wheel, dark hair spilling across her face, blood tracing a thin line from her temple. She was breathing barely. "Hey," Jack said, gently tapping her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. "We've got to get you out of here," he said, reaching for the seatbelt. "Storm's getting worse." She didn't resist. She couldn't. With practiced care, Jack lifted her from the seat, surprised at how light she was, how fragile. She was dressed too thin for this weather-tailored coat, silk blouse, no gloves. Back in the truck, Owen stirred as Jack laid her across the bench seat, tucking his coat around her. "Who's that?" Owen murmured. Jack looked at the stranger he'd just pulled from the snow, her breath fogging the air. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But she needs our help." She was colder than she should have been. Jack could feel it even through his flannel shirt and the layers he'd thrown over her. Her skin was pale, her lips edged with blue, and her breath came in thin, uneven draws, shallow, enough to make him glance twice to make sure she was still breathing. Snowflakes melted slowly on her lashes, and a smear of blood had dried just beneath her hairline where she'd likely struck the window. He laid her down gently across the front seat, careful not to jostle her too much. The inside of the truck was already warming, the heater humming against the cold, but it didn't seem like enough. Jack reached behind him and grabbed an old quilt from the back, worn soft from years of use. He wrapped it around her, tucking it close, and turned the heat up a notch. "Dad," Owen whispered, sitting up now, rubbing his eyes. "Is she okay?" "I think so," Jack said, glancing over. "She's hurt, but not too bad. Just needs to warm up." Owen peered at her, brow furrowed. "She's really pretty," Jack almost smiled. Trust a kid to say what everyone else was thinking. He put the truck in gear, tires spinning slightly before catching traction. The storm wasn't letting up, and he knew the nearest hospital was over 40 minutes away, if he was lucky. The back roads were too risky, and the main highway had been closed since early afternoon. His house was 10 minutes up the road, small, warm, stocked with bandages and basic supplies. And it was the only real option right now. The woman stirred beside him, a soft whimper slipping past her lips. "It's all right," Jack said gently. "You're safe." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dazed. For a moment, she stared at him, like trying to remember something. Or maybe trying to figure out if this was real. "Car," she murmured. "Did I?" "You crashed. You're okay now. I pulled you out." She blinked slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." Jack gave a small nod, eyes back on the road, hands steady on the wheel. Whoever she was, wherever she'd come from, it didn't matter. Not yet. Right now, she was just a woman in the snow. And he was the only one who'd stopped. By the time Jack pulled into his long gravel driveway, the storm had worsened. The snow whipped across the yard like smoke, piling in drifts against the porch steps. The house was dark, save for the yellow porch light Jack had left on that morning, casting a faint halo through the whiteout. He turned off the ignition, then sat still for a moment, listening to the woman's labored breathing, the tick of the cooling engine, and Owen's quiet voice. "Dad, there's a dog in the back." Jack twisted in his seat. Sure enough, nestled in the rear of the SUV, now parked awkwardly along the shoulder of the road, had been a golden retriever. It must have followed Jack's truck, trotting through the snow as he drove, loyal to the end. "Well, I'll be," Jack muttered. The dog stood outside the truck now, tail wagging in, slow, uncertain sweeps, fur dusted in white. Jack opened the door. "Come on, buddy. Inside." The retriever bounded up the porch steps with surprising energy, then stopped to shake snow all over the entryway. Jack carried the woman inside, one arm beneath her knees, the other at her back, while Owen opened the front door with both hands, like it took all his strength just to budge it. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke, and Cinnamon Jack had left the slow cooker on low, chili warming in the kitchen. He placed the woman carefully on the old leather couch, then threw another log into the wood stove in the corner. Heat pulsed out steadily, wrapping the room in a welcome hush. Owen crouched beside the dog, scratching behind its ears. "What's her name, do you think?" Jack shook his head. "Don't know. She didn't say much. Probably hit her head pretty hard." "She looks like a princess," Owen whispered. Jack looked down at the woman. Her coat was torn, her hair tangled. But even now, unconscious and worn down, there was something poised about her. Elegant in a way you didn't see much in their part of the world. "She might be," Jack said, half to himself. He pulled a blanket over her and stepped back, the silence of the room settling around them. Snow tapped against the windows like a quiet reminder. No ambulance was coming. No cavalry. For tonight, it was just them. The first thing Claire registered was the smellwood smoke, faintly sweet, mingled with something savory and warm. Then came the ache, a dull pounding throb behind her temple. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, one hand instinctively reaching toward her head. The couch beneath her was worn but soft, the blanket over her heavy with unfamiliar weight. She sat up too fast. The room tilted, shadows swimming at the edges of her vision. "Easy." The voice came from across the room, low, steady, unfamiliar. Claire's eyes snapped toward the sound. A man stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly tousled, holding a chipped blue mug in one hand and a first aid kit in the other. He looked like he belonged in this kind of house, rugged and ordinary, with honest eyes and tired shoulders. Claire flinched. Where am I?" "My place," he said, setting the mug down on the coffee table and crouching near her. "You crashed. I found you on Route 9, took you here. Roads were blocked, no way to get through." She blinked slowly, trying to process his words. "My car? In the ditch. Left it there for now. Your dog made it too. He's been curled up by the stove since we got in." Claire turned her head and saw Max, her retriever, snoozing on a worn rug, chest rising and falling peacefully. Relief fluttered through her chest. "I didn't steal anything," the man added. "Didn't even look through your stuff. Just wanted to make sure you were okay." Claire studied him. He wasn't lying. She could tell. There was nothing calculating about his gaze, just quiet concern. Still, her guard stayed up. Years of boardroom battles, false friends, and prying eyes had taught her to trust no one. "You hit your head," he continued, reaching for the first aid kit. "You've got a decent cut. Can I take a look?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. He dabbed at her temple gently, the antiseptic stinging just enough to remind her this wasn't a dream. "I'm Jack, by the way," he said. "Jack Harlow. And you are—" Claire paused. Her name felt too heavy, too dangerous right now. Claire. No last name, just Claire. Jack nodded, not pressing. She looked around again, taking in the worn furniture, the flickering stove, and the little boy now peeking in from the hallway. She was far from her world. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. The next morning, the world outside was blanketed in white silence. Snow had piled high against the porch rails, burying the mailbox and swallowing the tire tracks Jack had left the night before. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove pulsed through the little house like a quiet heartbeat, and Claire sat wrapped in the same quilt she'd woken under, staring out the window as the sun rose pale and gold over the tree line. She couldn't remember the last time she'd watched the morning arrive without a meeting waiting, a phone buzzing, or someone expecting her to perform. Here, there was only stillness, and the occasional bark from Max, who had claimed the hearth like a throne. Jack stood at the stove in the open kitchen, sleeves pushed up again, flipping something in a cast-iron skillet. His hands moved with quiet confidentino wasted effort, no show. He hadn't asked many questions since she woke. No prying, no awkward curiosity. He just made her tea, wrapped her ankle when he noticed her limp, and told Owen gently to give her space. It unsettled her more than if he'd demanded answers. "You hungry?" Jack asked, glancing over his shoulder. She hesitated. "A little. Hope you like eggs and toast. It's what we've got." "I'm not picky," she said, though she wasn't used to anything that didn't come from a curated menu or a high-rise kitchen. Still, the smell was tempting. Real butter, a hint of pepper, something warm and grounding. He set a plate in front of her on the coffee table and sat in the worn armchair across the room, letting her eat in peace. Claire watched him. His flannel sleeves were smudged with grease, probably from working on her car last night, and there was a tiny tear at the shoulder of his shirt. Nothing about him was polished, but there was a steadiness in the way he carried himself, like the world could fall apart and he'd keep hammering it back into shape with his own two hands. "You live here alone?" she asked after a few minutes. "Just me and Owen," he said. "Since my wife passed." She didn't expect him to say it so simply. No bitterness, no drama. Just the truth. "I'm sorry," she murmured. He shrugged. "Life's not fair, but we keep moving." Claire nodded slowly, her eyes drifting to the calluses on his hands. In her world, people wore masks of kindness, smiles, sharpened like blades. But this man wore his kindness like skin. It wasn't polished. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. By late afternoon, the snow had eased into a soft flurry, dusting the windows in quiet spirals. Jack had finished splitting the last of the firewood, his boots leaving wet prints across the floor as he stomped inside, brushing snow from his coat. Claire sat at the small kitchen table, cradling a second cup of tea in her hands, watching the steam curl lazily upward like it had nowhere to be. The table was a little wobbly. The chair's Miss Machadone had duct tape wrapped around the leg, but it felt lived in. Worn not from neglect, but from love. A ceramic rooster sat crookedly in the center, clearly Owen's handiwork, painted in wild streaks of blue and orange. Owen sat across from her, tongue poking out the corner of his mouth as he scribbled in a workbook, his head bent in concentration. Every so often he would ask Jack something like, "How do you spell beautiful?" or "What's 8 times 6 again?" And Jack would answer patiently, always with a small grin. Claire listened, not just with her ears, but with her whole body. There was no buzzing phone, no personal assistant knocking on the door, no meetings in sterile glass boardrooms. Just the clink of dishes, the faint hum of the heater, and the scribble of a crayon on cheap-lined paper. Jack slid a plate in front of her grilled cheese, crisp at the edges, a bowl of tomato soup steaming beside it. "This okay?" he asked. Claire nodded, the lump in her throat unexpected. "It's perfect." He sat down across from her, folding his hands and glancing toward Owen. "Kid's got a science project next week, solar system made out of cereal boxes. We'll see how that turns out." "I'm sure it'll be ambitious," Claire said with a small smile. Jack chuckled, and for a moment they just ate. No pretense, no expectations. Claire found herself watching the way Jack gently corrected Owen's math problem, the way his brow creased in focus, the soft way he patted the boy's shoulder. There was so much care in him, and none of it was loud. It had been so long since she'd felt this, whatever this was. Not just safety, not just comfort, peace, a kind of peace that didn't ask anything from her, that just let her be. She hadn't realized how much she missed that. The next morning brought a brittle kind of sunlight, the kind that shimmered off the snow but didn't offer any warmth. Jack scraped the ice from the windshield of his pickup while Claire waited inside, bundled in one of his spare coats that was far too big for her. Max sat loyally at her feet, tail thumping against the floor, while Owen tugged at his boots, already asking if they could build a snow fort after school. Claire hadn't argued when Jack suggested the local clinic. Her head still ached, and the cut on her temple had begun to bruise in purples and yellows. He insisted on getting it, looked at quiet but firm, the way he always seemed to be. She agreed, even though part of her wished she could remain hidden a little longer. The clinic was small, wedged between a diner and a post office, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Jack held the door open as she stepped inside, his presence a quiet anchor beside her. The nurse at the front desk looked up, her smile automatic until her eyes landed on Claire. There was a flicker. The kind of pause that meant recognition was catching up to surprise. Claire saw it instantly. She knew that look. The nurse tried to recover, typing something into the computer with trembling fingers. You're here for?" "Head injury," Jack answered. "Minor, but we wanted to be sure." The nurse nodded too quickly. "Of course, right this way." Claire followed her back, the antiseptic smell tightening her chest. Jack stayed in the lobby with Owen, flipping through a battered sports magazine without really reading it. It wasn't long before the nurse reappeared, eyes wide, cautious. She leaned down toward Jack's chair, voice low. "Do you know who that is?" Jack blinked. "Claire? Claire Whitmore," she whispered, like the name might set something off. "As in Whitmore Automotive. She's on the board of 5 Fortune 500 companies. Her face was on the cover of Forbes last fall." Jack looked past the swinging door toward the exam room, a strange tension pulling across his chest. Claire Whitmore. He'd seen the name in headlines. Heard it mentioned on the radio? Maybe. But the woman drinking tea at his kitchen table, helping Owen color planets? He hadn't connected her to that world. He exhaled slowly. Of course she hadn't told him. And now, things suddenly felt different. Jack didn't say much on the drive home. Owen dozed in the back seat, his head resting against Max's soft fur, while Claire stared out the passenger window, the silence between them louder than any storm. The trees flashed by in blurs of white and pine, the road slick but familiar. Jack kept his hands tight on the wheel, jaw set, eyes fixed straight ahead. Claire had noticed the shift the moment they left the clinic. He hadn't looked at her the same way. Not unkind, just distant, guarded, like a door had quietly closed between them. When they pulled into the driveway, Jack cut the engine and sat for a beat too long. Claire turned to him. "I didn't mean to lie." "You didn't lie," he said, still staring at the windshield. "You just didn't tell me." Claire swallowed. "I was trying to stay under the radar. There's been pressure. Back home. People watching. I needed to disappear for a little while. And land in my truck?" She offered a small, tired smile. "Fate, I guess." Jack finally looked at her. His eyes weren't cold, just weary. The kind of weary you didn't get from bad sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. "Look, Claire Whitmore, or whoever you are, I'm not part of that world. I fix cars, I raise my boy, and I try to keep the lights on at a garage that barely breaks even in a good month." "I didn't ask you for anything," she said gently. "I know. That's what makes this harder." He stepped out of the truck before she could respond, quietly lifting Owen into his arms and carrying him inside. Claire followed, the cold biting at her cheeks, the house suddenly feeling smaller, more fragile than it had before. She stood in the living room, unsure whether to sit or speak, or leave entirely. Jack returned a moment later, arms crossed. People like you don't just vanish. Eventually, the press finds you. So do the people you're hiding from. Claire nodded slowly. That's true. And I've got a kid to think about. I'd never put him in danger. You might not mean to, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. They stood in silence, the only sound, the low crackle of the wood stove. Jack exhaled, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. I don't need drama, Claire. I've had enough of it to last a lifetime. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just nodded, voice quiet. Understood. But the look she gave him before walking into the spare room said everything else. Sometimes, even when you're not asking for anything, you're still hoping someone will choose you anyway. The next morning, the house was quiet, wrapped in that strange stillness that only comes after an argument no one quite knows how to finish. The snow had stopped, but the sky outside was the color of stilo-hanging clouds pressing against the tops of the trees. Jack stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing out the old coffee pot with more force than necessary. Claire lingered in the hallway, uncertain whether she was welcome or tolerated or somewhere in between. Can we talk? She asked softly. Jack didn't look up. Go ahead. She stepped into the kitchen, arms crossed tightly over one of his flannels. It swallowed her, sleeves rolled several times, but she looked steadier this morning. Tired but less like she was running. I need you to promise me something, she said. Jack dried his hands on a towel, finally meeting her eyes. Depends what it is. Claire took a breath. Please don't call anyone, not the media, not the police, not anyone who might leak where I am. You think I'd do that? I think you have every reason to, she said carefully. And I wouldn't blame you. Jack leaned back against the counter, arms folded. You said you're not in danger. Not really. So what are you hiding from? Claire looked down at her hands, fingers twisting the fabric at her wrist. A man who doesn't take no for an answer. A company that stopped feeling like mine a long time ago. And a world where I don't get to breathe unless I'm smiling for a camera. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then, that's not the same as being in danger. It is, she said. Just a different kind, the kind that slowly eats at you until you forget who you are. He studied her, weighing something in his mind. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I won't call anyone, he said finally. But I've got Owen to think about. One sign of trouble and you're gone. No questions. Claire nodded, relief softening her shoulders. Deal. Jack turned back to the coffee pot, pouring the first cup with practiced ease. He slid it across the counter toward her without a word. Claire took it, their fingers brushing for the briefest second. A deal made in silence, but one that mattered more than anything spoken aloud. The days passed slowly, the snowbanks shrinking under a weak winter sun that finally began to show its face. The road started to clear, the icicles hanging from the eaves dripped steadily, and the town beyond Jack's driveway began to stir back to life. But inside the little house, something else was thawing, something more complicated. Claire had settled into the rhythm of Jack's world, but she didn't belong to it, not really. She helped with dishes, folded laundry, even learned how to use the ancient coffee maker without flooding the counter. But Jack could see it in the way she looked out the window a little too long, or the way her phone remained powered off in the drawer by the stove, untouched but not forgotten. She was waiting for something. Or maybe for someone. Jack didn't ask. He didn't want the answers. Still, the silence between them had changed. It wasn't hostile, not exactly. Just stiff, cautious. Like two people keeping polite distance while pretending they weren't thinking about all the unspoken things pressing in around them. Claire, for her part, paced more now. Took longer walks with Max. Cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. She joked with Owen, helped him build a lopsided solar system out of cereal boxes and glue, and read aloud while he fell asleep curled up next to her on the couch. Owen adored her in that uncomplicated way kids do fully, without question. Can Claire stay forever? He asked one night as Jack tucked him in. Jack smiled, tired. She's just visiting, bud. But she makes pancakes better than you. Jack laughed under his breath. "Don't rub it in." Still, something in Owen's question lingered with him. Jack lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind whisper against the windows. Claire was in the next room. Her presence was gentle but undeniable. She'd brought warmth into their home. But she'd also brought secrets. And secrets had a way of attracting storms, no matter how clear the skies looked. The snow might have started melting, but Jack could feel something colder building beneath the surface. A shift in the air, a warning. He didn't know what was coming. But he knew it wasn't going to stay quiet for long. The days stretched a little longer now, sunlight lingering like it was trying to coax the world back to life. Snow melted in slushy rivers down the driveway, and the wind carried the sharp smell of thawing earth and pine. The pace of things remained slow, steady dinners cooked from scratch, evenings by the fire, and long, quiet walks down the back road that led to the creek. It was on one of those walks that something shifted. Jack carried a thermos of coffee, hands buried deep in the pockets of his jacket. Claire walked beside him, Max trotting ahead, nose low to the ground. They didn't speak much at first. It was the kind of silence that felt not awkward, not strained, just comfortable. The air between them held a kind of understanding that didn't need to be spelled out. "I used to hate silence," Claire said suddenly, her voice soft beneath the rustle of wind through bare trees. "In my world, it meant something was wrong. A deal falling through, a headline about to drop. Silence felt like danger." Jack glanced over at her but didn't interrupt. "But here," she continued, "it's different. Your silence, it's steady, like a place to land." He didn't know what to say to that. So he just nodded, because he understood more than he could explain. They walked a little farther before she spoke again. "I was engaged," she said quietly. Jack's eyes flicked toward her again, but her gaze stayed ahead. "His name's Trevor. We'd known each other for years. He was charming, polished, said all the right things to all the right people. But when the doors closed," she trailed off, then gave a small shake of her head. "He wanted control more than love, wanted me in his world, on his terms. I didn't even see it happening. Not at first." Jack's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. "I tried to leave last year. He made sure I couldn't. Lawyers, contracts, board votes. My name's on everything, but somehow I own none of it." Jack stopped walking, turning to face her. "You ran," he said. Claire nodded. "For the first time in my life." They stood there for a moment, Max sniffing at something in the underbrush a few feet away. Claire's breath was visible in the cool air, but her eyes were steady now. "Open." "Thanks for not asking," she said. "Most people would have pressed the minute they found out who I was." Jack took a sip of his coffee and gave a small shrug. "Everyone's got something they don't want to talk about. Doesn't mean they don't need someone to listen when they finally do." A small smile tugged at her lips, and in that quiet moment between the trees, something softened. Not a confession, not a promise, just the beginning of trust. Sometimes, that's all you need. The bell above the garage door gave its usual half-hearted jingle as Claire pushed through it. Sleeves rolled, and determination already written across her face. Jack looked up from beneath the hood of an old Dodge pickup, eyebrows raised. "I told you, you don't have to be here," he said, wiping his hands on a shop towel. "I know," Claire replied, tossing her coat over the chair in the corner. "But I want to be." Jack didn't argue. He'd learned by now that Claire had her own kind of stubborn. The quiet kind. Not loud or demanding, but persistent in a way that made ignoring her feel like a lost cause. Her first day in the garage had been a bit of a disaster. She'd dropped a wrench on her foot, spilled oil across the concrete, and nearly knocked over a shelf full of spark plugs. But she kept showing up, day after day, ponytail tucked through a baseball cap, sleeves pushed up, asking questions, and refusing to be treated like she didn't belong. Jack started teaching her the basic show, to check an oil filter, how to listen to the hum of a struggling engine, how to find rhythm in the work, and Claire, she paid attention. She wasn't fast, but she was sharp, focused. She laughed more, too. Really laughed. Not the polite, hollow kind he imagined she used at boardroom dinners. This was the real kind. The kind that came from slipping on a grease stain and landing on her backside, then laughing until she cried while Jack stood over her, shaking his head with a half-smile. "You know this isn't exactly corporate training," he joked one afternoon as she attempted to pry off a rusted wheel nut. Claire grunted, giving the wrench another twist. "Trust me, this is better. No one here's trying to stab me with a fountain pen." Jack chuckled. Low bar. But the truth was, she belonged here more than either of them had expected. Not because she knew engines or liked the smell of motor oil, but because she fit in the rhythm, in the space. At lunch, they ate sandwiches on the back step, Max curled up nearby, the sun warming their faces. Owen would stop by after school, hands already reaching for Claire's before he even said hello. Jack didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. The garage, his world, had always been full of noise. Tools clanking, engines revving, radios humming. But with Claire around, it had something new, laughter, and he realized he hadn't missed-eyed, just forgotten what it sounded like. The house was wrapped in the kind of stillness only winter could bring. Outside, wind whispered through the trees, brushing snow from the branches in soft thumps. Inside, the fire in the wood stove had burned down to glowing embers, casting faint orange light across the walls. Jack lay in bed, one arm tucked beneath his head, listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of the old house settling in the cold. Then he heard it, not loud but enough. A sound sharp with fear, muffled like someone trying not to be heard. A whimper, then the rustle of covers, and a soft, choked gasp. He was up before he even realized he'd moved. The hallway floor was cold beneath his feet, even through his socks. He padded quietly to the door of the spare room and knocked once, gently. "Claire?" Silence. Then, a small voice. Shaken. "Yeah, I'm okay." He didn't wait for an invitation. Just opened the door slowly and stepped inside. She sat upright in the narrow bed, hair tangled, breath ragged, eyes wide in the half-dark. The blanket was pulled tight around her, like armor she couldn't quite let go of. The dog, Max, lay curled at the foot of the bed, ears perked but unmoving as if he'd seen this before and knew his place was to stay close and wait. Jack didn't ask what she'd dreamed about. Didn't need to. "You want some water?" he asked softly. She nodded. In the kitchen, he filled a glass with the quiet care of a man used to late-night wake-ups. When he returned, she took the water with trembling hands and sipped slowly. "Thanks," she whispered, eyes not quite meeting his. Jack sat on the edge of the chair across from her, elbows on his knees. "Bad dream?" Claire let out a bitter breath. "It always starts the same. The office. The boardroom. Him standing there telling me I'm nothing without him, that no one will believe me, that I'm just a name on a piece of paper." Jack didn't flinch, didn't rush in with reassurances or empty comfort. He just said, "You're not." She looked up, eyes shining. "You're not just a name, and you're not alone." The fire crackled faintly from the other room, the warmth reaching even here, into the edges of something cold inside her. Jack stood after a while, nodding toward the door. "If it gets bad again, just knock. Doesn't matter the hour." Claire watched him go, her throat tight, with a kind of gratitude she hadn't known how to name in years. That night, when she finally slept again, it was deeper, and the house, somehow, felt safer than it ever had before. The morning of Owen's 7th birthday arrived with the scent of vanilla and something sweet in the air. Claire had been up before the sun, barefoot in Jack's tiny kitchen, sleeves rolled and hair a mess of loose waves. Flour dusted the counters, chocolate smudged her cheek, and the oven timer ticked down like it was counting heartbeats. She hadn't baked a cake in years, not really. There'd been catered desserts and lavish spreads for charity galas, sure. But this was different, real, messy. Hers. Outside, Jack strung up a simple banner across the back fence, "Happy Birthday, Owen," in blocky blue letters. He hammered it in, with more care than the task needed, glancing back toward the window where Claire stood, her arms crossed as she watched. Owen's friends from school trickled in around noon, bundled in jackets, tossing snowballs before the party even started. There were paper hats, hot dogs on the grill, and a beat-up old radio playing classic rock while Max wove between kids, tail wagging non-stop. The backyard looked like something from another time. No bounce house, no entertainers. Just laughter and cold noses and muddy boots. Claire came outside with the cake balanced in her handsaw, little lopsided icing imperfect, candles jammed in wherever they'd fit. But Owen's eyes lit up like it was made of gold. "You made that?" he asked wide-eyed. She nodded, smiling. "From scratch." "It's awesome!" he shouted, already gathering the kids around. Jack stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching Claire as she watched them. Her smile flickered, sometimes never fully fading, but never fully reaching her eyes either. He saw it in the way she held her arms tight to her chest when the kids sang, and how she stepped back just a little when Owen hugged her. She was there, but not all the way. Later, when the party had thinned and the sun dipped low behind the trees, Jack found her sitting alone on the porch steps, fingers stained with chocolate frosting, gaze distant. "You okay?" he asked, easing down beside her. She nodded, staring at the empty chairs and half-deflated balloons. It was perfect. "You did good." Claire smiled, quiet. "I think this is the first time I've felt like I gave someone something that mattered. Not a donation, not a product launch, just cake, joy." Jack looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he saw not just the woman who had crashed into his life, but the one who, deep down, still wasn't sure she deserved to stay. It started with a whisper. Jack was closing up the garage for the day, hands slick with grease, radio playing low in the background. The bell above the door jingled as someone from town dropped off their rusted-out Ford for a brake job, but their greeting came with an edge of curiosity he didn't like. "Busy day?" the man asked, trying too hard to sound casual. Jack nodded. "Always is." The man lingered. "Heard we've got ourselves a celebrity in town. That true?" Jack froze. The rag in his hand went still mid-wipe. "What are you talking about? Someone showed me an article. Said Claire Whitmore's hiding out around here. You know, that auto heiress? There's even a picture. Looks a lot like her standing outside the clinic, bundled up in some old coat." Jack didn't answer, didn't need to. His silence said enough. The man gave a short, awkward laugh. "Guess the media circus won't be far behind, huh?" When he left, Jack stood there for a long moment, the hum of the heater suddenly deafening. By the time he pulled into the driveway that evening, the sky had turned a bruised kind of gray, the kind that promised more snow. Claire was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, Max curled at her feet. Her phone was in her hand charged now, turned on. She didn't look up as he climbed the steps, just held out the phone in silence. On the screen was a tabloid headline, big and shameless. "Heiress on the run. Claire Whitmore spotted in small. Town snowstorm below it." A blurry photo of her at the Cliniches, tired, hair pulled back, Jack just out of frame behind her. Jack stared at the image, jaw tight. "They found me," Claire said quietly, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. "Someone must have leaked it. Maybe the nurse. Maybe someone saw me leaving with you. I don't know." Jack didn't respond. He stepped back, hands on his hips, staring at the ground like it might offer answers. Claire's voice broke the silence. "I should go." "No," he said quickly. Then, softer. "Not yet." But they both knew what this meant. Peace never lasted long when your name was currency. And now, the world outside their quiet corner had found its way in. The black SUV rolled into Maple Hollow like it didn't belong, shiny, spotless, and silent as a shadow. It parked across from the town diner, tinted windows hiding its passengers from the handful of locals who paused mid-conversation to watch. Nothing that polished ever showed up here unless something bad was about to follow. Jack spotted it from the bay window of the garage. His stomach tightened before he even saw the man step out, tall, impeccably dressed, the kind of tailored coat that cost more than Jack's monthly mortgage. His hair was slicked back with precision, shoes spotless despite the slush. He didn't look at the town, he looked through it, like he already owned it. Claire's ex, Trevor Langford. Jack had seen his face once, months ago, in a magazine Owen had been coloring on. The caption had read something ridiculous, power couple of the decade, Whitmore, Langford. Back then, Jack hadn't thought much about the man. Now he couldn't stop the spike of protectiveness rising in his chest. Trevor walked with two others, both wearing suits too clean for a town this dusty. Legal muscle, Jack guessed, not the kind of men who came to talk. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and met them on the gravel outside before they could reach the porch. "Jack Harlow?" Trevor asked, voice smooth but sharp, the kind that came with practiced charm and a habit of not hearing the word no. "Who's asking?" Jack shot back, already knowing. Trevor gave a thin smile. "I'm here for Claire. She's a vulnerable woman who's made some emotional decisions, and we'd like to help her get back to where she belongs." Jack didn't move. "She's not interested." "She doesn't have a choice," one of the men behind Trevor chimed in, holding out a thick envelope. "Legal proceedings. Claire's in violation of multiple contractual obligations, including non-disclosure agreements, pending corporate mergers, and a temporary board absence." Jack's jaw clenched. "That's not my problem." Trevor stepped closer. "It will be, Jack. If you're housing her, aiding her, protecting her, you're part of the story now. I'm giving you a chance to step aside before things get complicated." From the porch, the screen door creaked open. Claire stood there, pale but steady, watching. Jack didn't look back. His voice came out flat, deliberate. "She's not property. You don't get to show up and drag her back because she walked away." Trevor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that." They left without another word, but Jack knew it wasn't over. Storms didn't knock on the door politely. They came to tear the roof off. The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen table like a loaded gun. Claire stared at it, arms folded tight across her chest, her knuckles white. The house was quiet, Owen asleep in the next room, Max curled at her feet, sensing the weight in the air. Jack stood a few feet away, leaning against the counter, watching her, not pressuring, just present. "They'll take everything," she said finally, voice flat. Jack nodded once. "They said as much. They'll strip my shares, lock me out of the board, freeze my accounts. My name will be a footnote in the company my grandfather built from the ground up." Her eyes met his, wide and shining. "And they'll make it look like it was my fault, like I was unstable, emotional, difficult. You're none of those things." "I am to them," she said bitterly. To Trevor, "The second I stopped playing nice, I became a liability." She sank into the chair like the fight had gone out of her. Jack wanted to reach for her, but he didn't. Not yet. "They said if I return quietly, sign a few statements, show up at one gala to prove I'm still committed, they'll make it all go away. No scandal, no lawsuits. Just a gentle return to the life I worked for." "But not the life you want." Claire didn't answer. "I'd have money again," she said after a while. "Stability, influence. I could keep funding the foundation. I could—" "But you'd be his," Jack interrupted, voice steady but hard. Again, she flinched. "He doesn't love you, Claire. He owns you, or at least he thinks he does." Claire closed her eyes, the silence between them, pressing in heavy and sharp. "I'm tired of fighting," she whispered. "I know," Jack said quietly. "But if you give up now, you'll be tired for the rest of your life." She looked at him, something raw and unguarded in her expression. "And if I stay here, what then?" Jack didn't have an answer. He wasn't offering her a mansion, not even a clean slate, just a tiny house, a warm fire, a boy who adored her, and a man who was learning to. Freedom came at a cost. So did safety, and Claire had to decide which one she could live without. The fire crackled low in the wood stove, casting a soft, flickering light across the living room. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows just enough to remind them how fragile warmth could be in a place like this. Claire sat curled into the corner of the couch, her knees drawn up, a mug of lukewarm tea resting against her palm. Jack stood at the hearth, poker in hand, stirring the embers without urgency. He hadn't spoken much since she told him about the ultimatum. Not in a cold way, just quiet, thoughtful, like he was carrying something too heavy to set down in a single breath. "I didn't think it would matter this much," Claire said finally. "That I'd have to choose between who I am and what I want." Jack set the poker down slowly. He didn't turn around. "It always matters," he said. Claire looked at him, studying the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw set like he was holding something in. "What about you?" she asked gently. "What did you have to choose?" Jack was quiet for a long time. Then he stepped away from the fire and sank into the chair across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "I met Grace in college," he said, voice low. "She was loud, wild, always the first one to speak her mind. I was the opposite, quiet. Took me 6 months to work up the nerve to ask her out." Claire listened, silent, heart already aching at the tenderness in his voice. "We got married young, moved back here when her dad passed. Took over the garage together. She got pregnant with Owen 2 years in. We were happy, mostly." He paused, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. "She got sick when Owen was 3. Autoimmune disorder. Came out of nowhere. The doctors couldn't pin it down fast enough. She spent more time in hospitals than at home that last year." Claire's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." Jack nodded, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the room. "I watched her fight every day, and I couldn't fix it. Me, the guy who can fix anything with a wrench and duct tape, I couldn't stop the one thing that mattered." He finally looked at her, his voice raw. "After she died, I promised myself I'd never let anyone in that deep again, because losing her almost broke me, and Owen, he deserves steady, simple, not more loss." Claire felt her eyes sting, the weight of his honesty anchoring something inside her. "I'm not asking you to risk everything," she said quietly. "I'm just asking if maybe you're tired of being alone." Jack leaned back, breathing deep. The fire popped in the silence between them. He didn't give her an answer. But he didn't walk away either. The suitcase lay open on the bed, half-packed, silent as a betrayal. Claire moved quietly through the room, folding clothes she hadn't worn in days, tucking away the little pieces of herself that had begun to settle in this house as if they belonged. A pair of worn jeans Jack had loaned her. Owen's hand-drawn solar system still clipped to the corner of her mirror. The mug with the chipped handle she always reached for in the morning. She hadn't told them. Not yet. She couldn't. The article had gone viral 2 days ago. News blogs picked it up first, then the bigger outlets. Headlines swirled online, speculating on her meltdown, her disappearance, her mysterious connection to a small-town mechanic. There were even blurry photos of Jack and Owen, taken through a car window. The story was growing teeth. Jack hadn't said much since. He hated the cameras, hated what it might do to Owento, the quiet, grounded life he'd fought to protect. So Claire had made a choice. She wouldn't take that from them, not after everything they'd given her. She moved with the careful efficiency of someone used to disappearing. Quickly clothes, toiletries, a worn envelope of emergency cash she always kept hidden in the lining of her bag. No phone, no electronics, nothing traceable. Max sat by the door, head tilted, eyes following her every step. "You're staying here," she whispered, kneeling beside him and pressing her forehead to his. "They need you more than I do." He whined low in his throat but didn't move. Claire zipped the bag shut and stood, wrapping herself in the heavy flannel jacket Jack had let her borrow the night of the crash. The scent of smoke and motor oil clung to it, grounding and familiar. She hesitated in the doorway, glancing down the hall where Owen slept, where Jack probably sat staring at the fire, pretending the world wasn't circling their quiet life like sharks in the water. Her throat tightened. She wanted to stay. God, she wanted to. But love wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about letting go before the damage could begin. Claire stepped out into the cold night, suitcase in hand, heart already breaking. She didn't look back. The house was still when Jack woke, too still. No soft rustling from the kitchen, no clink of a mug on the counter, no faint hum of Claire humming off-key as she fed Max or made tea with that focused care she gave to everything. Just silence, hollow and unfamiliar. He sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Owen was still out cold in the next room, snoring softly. Max lay curled on the living room rug, tail twitching, eyes fixed on the front door like he was waiting for something that wasn't coming back. Jack's gut twisted. He rose, padded barefoot down the hallway. Claire's door was open. The bed was made, the quilt folded neatly at the foot. Her flannel jacket, the one she wore like armor, was gone. So was the duffel bag he kept stashed in the hall closet. The drawer where she kept her few things hung slightly open, empty. He checked the kitchen next, foolishly hopeful. Maybe she'd gone for a walk. Maybe she was outside clearing snow from the porch or feeding the birds like she had yesterday morning. But the driveway was untouched, no footprints, no sign of her car, because she didn't have one, and no note, no goodbye, just absence, thick as smoke. Jack stood by the stove, staring blankly at the kettle on the burner. The same one he'd filled every morning since she arrived. It sat cold and dry, untouched. The silence in the room pressed in, sharp and sudden. He clenched his jaw, hands flexing uselessly at his sides. Max let out a low whine. Jack didn't move for a long time. Didn't sit. Didn't pace. Just stood there, feeling the ghost of her in the room, the sound of her laughter echoing faintly, the memory of her hands deep in dishwater, her eyes meeting his over dinner, like maybe she was finally starting to believe she could belong here, and now she was gone. No warning, no explanation. He didn't need one. She'd left to protect them. He knew that. Knew it deep down in the part of him that had once made the same kind of choice. But that didn't stop it from hurting like hell. The flashbulbs started the moment the Blacktown car pulled up to the Whitmore building. Claire stepped out into a wall of noise shouts from reporters, clicking cameras, questions hurled like stones. "Claire, where have you been? Are you back for good? Is it true you disappeared with a mechanic?" She kept her chin high, face unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Security flanked her on either side, clearing a path through the crowd. But even with the bodies moving for her, it felt like drowning. The concrete beneath her heels might as well have been ice. Inside the building, the air smelled like steel and old money. Polished marble floors, glass walls, everything pristine and sterile. Claire moved like a ghost through the lobby she used to own. People stared, some with pity, some with curiosity, a few with the careful blankness of those trying not to get involved. The elevator doors closed, sealing her in. Only then did she exhale. By the time she reached the top floor, Trevor was already waiting seated at the boardroom table with that practiced smile that had fooled the world for years. His lawyers flanked him like statues, sleek and soulless. "Well," he said, standing as she entered. "Welcome home." Claire didn't answer. She sat down slowly, her palms pressed flat against the cool glass of the table, her body here but her mind somewhere else. Snow-covered trees. A crooked banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Owen." The sound of Jack's quiet laugh. The feel of Max's warm head in her lap. This wasn't home. Trevor launched into strategy how they'd spin her absence, how she'd reclaim her seat on the board, what photos to approve for press. It was all scripted, precise, lifeless. Claire nodded at the right moments. She signed the documents they slid in front of her, but her fingers felt numb. She had everything she was supposed to want. Her name restored, her assets unfrozen, her reputation patched like a torn hem. And yet, all she could think about was a small garage at the edge of a snowy town, a boy with a laugh too big for his jacket, and a man who had once said nothing at all because he didn't have to. The spotlight was blinding. And it had never felt so cold. The conference room was lined with glass and power. Across the long mahogany table sat board members in designer suits, eyes flicking between their tablets and Claire, as if weighing her value by the second. She sat straighter than she felt, one hand resting lightly on a stack of contracts, the other curled around a pen she hadn't used yet. "I won't be a silent partner," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. Trevor raised an eyebrow, fingers steepled. "You walked away, Claire. You disappeared without notice. We're cleaning up your mess." Claire met his gaze without blinking. "And now I'm cleaning up yours." The boardroom was silent. "I know the numbers," she continued. "I've reviewed the filings, the acquisition deals, the overseas distributions. You've leveraged Whitmore assets for personal gain and disguised it as portfolio growth." A flicker of discomfort moved through the room. Trevor leaned back, smiling too tightly. "You have no proof." Claire reached into her briefcase and slid a folder across the table. "I do now. It took hours, but by the time the meeting ended, she had what she came for. Her voting rights reinstated, her access to the Whitmore Trust unblocked, and a private clause inserted that allowed her to redirect personal funds without board oversight, provided they didn't exceed a certain cap. It was enough. That night, back in her penthouse apartmenta glass tower that felt like a cage, Claire sat on the floor in front of her laptop, the glow of the screen, the only light in the room. She scrolled through rural business registries until she found it. Harlow's Auto Repair, Maple Hollow. Ilshi clicked through, lips pressing into a soft smile at the grainy photo of the garage. Jack barely visible in the background, sleeves rolled, half smirking like the camera was an inconvenience. She opened a private banking portal and began to type. The donation would come anonymously, routed through a small foundation with no trace to her name. Enough to clear the garage's debts. Enough to repair the roof he kept patching with tar. Enough to buy time. She paused, fingers hovering over the send button. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a plea. It was just a gift. A thank you. For the firewood. For the space. For the silence that had healed her more than any spotlight ever had. Claire clicked send and closed the laptop. And for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. Jack stood in the back office of the garage, one hand braced against the filing cabinet, the other holding a letter he'd read 3 times already. It wasn't from a bank, exactly not one he recognized. The envelope had arrived that morning in the usual stack of invoices and junk mail. Plain. No return address. Just his name, typed neatly across the front. Inside was a formal notice of deposit, confirming that an anonymous donation substantial had been wired directly into his business account, enough to cover the back taxes he'd been avoiding, enough to pay off the line of credit he'd been living under for years. Enough to breathe, too much to be random. Jack stared at the numbers again, the weight of them sitting heavy in his palm. He knew exactly where it came from. Or more precisely who. Claire hadn't left a note, hadn't called. Not even a text to say goodbye. But this? This was her note. He walked out of the office slowly, blinking against the winter sunlight. Owen was in the corner of the garage, playing with a pile of washers and pretending they were treasure. Max was sprawled near the space heater, head lifting as Jack stepped closer. Jack crouched down beside him, hand rubbing behind the dog's ears. "She sent it, didn't she?" he murmured. Max gave a quiet huff, tail thumping once. Jack sat back on the cold concrete, the scent of motor oil and old coffee grounding him. He thought about the way Claire had fit herself into this place without trying to change it. The way she helped without asking for thanks. The way she looked at Owen like he was made of something she'd never seen before. He'd let himself believe she could stay. And maybe, just maybe, a part of her still wanted to. But Jack knew money like this didn't come without weight. Even as a gift, it came laced with goodbye. Still, he couldn't bring himself to send it back, because the garage had always been his way of surviving. And maybe, just maybe, this was her way of saying she wanted him to do more than just survive. The letter was folded unevenly, The paper creased and smudged with fingerprints and a faint trace of peanut butter in the corner. Written in crooked crayon lines, half block letters, half guesswork, it was tucked carefully into an envelope with a single forever stamp and Claire's name scrawled across the front in bright red. Just Claire. No last name, no address. Only the return line. Owen Harlow, Maple Hollow, IL. Jack found it sitting on the kitchen counter one evening after dinner, right beside a half-eaten apple and a stack of Owen's drawings. He picked it up, frowning gently as he read the cover. "What's this?" Owen looked up from where he was sprawled on the floor with Max, coloring in the planets of his cardboard solar system. "It's for Claire." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You don't have her address." "I know," Owen said simply, like it didn't matter. "But the post office will figure it out. They always do in the movies." Jack sat down slowly, sliding the envelope open. Inside, the letter read, "Dear Claire, are you okay? We miss you. Max misses you a lot. He keeps sleeping by the door. Dad pretends he doesn't miss you, but I think he's lying. He made pancakes, and they were not as good as yours. I got a B+ on my space project. You would have liked it. Please come back soon. Or at least write back. Love." Owen. Jack stared at the page for a long time, his throat tightening with every line. The handwriting wobbled. Some words were backwards, others misspelled. But the message was perfectly clear. He swallowed hard, blinking down at the final line. "Dad pretends he doesn't miss you, but I think he's lying." He folded the letter back up carefully, slid it into the envelope, and sealed it without a word. The next morning, Jack walked Owen to the post office and let him drop the letter into the mailbox himself. The boy grinned up at him, proud and certain. "She'll get it," Owen said. Jack didn't answer, but as they walked back through the snow, his hand never left the boy's shoulder. The bus pulled into Maple Hollow just after sunset, its engine groaning like it resented the cold. Claire stepped off slowly, boots crunching against the slush-packed curb. She wore no designer coat, no sunglasses to hide behind. Just a knit hat pulled low over her ears, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a worn scarf that still smelled faintly of Jack's wood stove. The town looked the same. The corner diner still glowed with warm light, its windows fogged up from the heat inside. The gas station sign flickered like always. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks, gray at the edges. People walked past her without a second glance, bundled in flannel and denim and purpose. It felt honest, quiet, real. She'd missed that more than she knew how to say. Claire walked the half-mile to the garage, her breath rising in little clouds. She hadn't called ahead. She didn't want an audience, didn't want to be expected. She just needed to be. When she reached the shop, the bay lights were still on. She could hear the clank of metal and the low buzz of a radio playing something old and familiar. Jack was under the hood of a Chevy, back turned, sleeves rolled, grease smudged along his forearm. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. He didn't notice her at first, and when he finally did, it wasn't dramatic. He just froze. Slowly he straightened, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked at her. Not like he didn't recognize her, but like he didn't trust that she was real. "I thought you were gone," he said quietly. "I was," she replied. "But I wasn't finished." Jack didn't move. His eyes searched hers, guarded and steady. "You left without a word." "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "And Owen. And the life you built here." He nodded slowly, jaw tight. "We didn't ask you to." "I know," she whispered. Silence settled between them, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Claire swallowed. "I'm not here as Whitmore. Not with cameras, or contracts, or noise. I'm just me, if that's still something you want." Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at her like a man standing at the edge of something: memories, risks, hope. Then he turned back to the truck, hands braced against the hood. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. "But you can come in out of the cold." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. The first few days, Claire didn't say much. She showed up each morning just after sunrise. Her hair tucked beneath a knit cap, sleeves rolled, hands already smudged with dirt before Jack could hand her a wrench. She didn't try to pick up where they left off. She didn't ask for anything. She just worked. Jack watched her from across the garage as she organized the cluttered shelves without being asked, wiped down tools he hadn't used in months, learned the difference between a timing chain and a drive belt with quiet determination. She burned her hand once on a hot engine block and didn't curse, just shook it out, bandaged it herself, and went right back to work. Owen, of course, accepted her return like no time had passed at all. "Claire fixed my model rocket," he bragged at school. She helped him with his math homework after dinner, walked him to the school bus when Jack opened early, made pancakes in the shape of dinosaurs that somehow looked more like dinosaurs than any Jack had ever managed. Claire laughed more now real, open laughter that curled through the house and softened the edges of everything. Even Max had returned to his place by her side like she'd never left. Jack tried not to notice how she hummed while sweeping the garage floor, or how she leaned her head against the porch post at night when the stars came out, or how she still cooked too much food at dinner, like she was afraid there wouldn't be enough. But he noticed anyway. She patched the hole in the chicken wire fence behind the house, organized the toolbox he'd meant to clean out for 2 years, brought coffee in the mornings and never took the last cup, always left the light on if he worked late, never pushed, never asked for more than what he was willing to give. One evening, after Owen had gone to bed and the house had gone still, Claire stepped out onto the porch where Jack was stacking firewood. "You don't have to let me stay," she said quietly, "but I'm going to keep showing up until you tell me not to." He looked at her, tired and worn and maybe a little more whole than he'd felt in a long time. "I haven't told you yet, have I?" "No," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. "Then I guess you'll be back tomorrow." And she was. The wind outside howled against the windows, sending tiny flecks of snow tapping like fingers on the glass. Inside, the house was wrapped in warmth and quiet. Owen had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket half pulled over him, his head nestled against Max's golden fur. The dog didn't move except to shift closer, a living pillow who'd long since claimed his role as guardian of the night. Claire and Jack sat by the fireplace, a few feet apart, but sharing the same glow of flickering orange light. The flames crackled softly, casting long shadows along the floor, wrapping everything in that kind of hushed stillness that asked for honesty, not conversation. Claire held a mug of tea she hadn't sipped in 10 minutes. She was watching the fire, but not really seeing it. Jack, for once, wasn't pretending not to look at her. She was different now, softer, somehow, but also stronger. There was a steadiness in her he hadn't seen when she first arrived, a quiet courage that showed in the way she let herself stay. No pretense, no shield, no carefully constructed lines. "I've been trying to figure out what this is," she said suddenly, her voice low. "You and me, this life. Whether I deserve it, whether it's real." Jack didn't respond right away. He reached forward, tossed another log onto the fire, and watched the embers flare. "It's real if we decide it is," he said. "That's the thing about life. You don't have to earn the right to want something different." She looked at him then, really looked, eyes shining, not from sadness, but from the weight of everything they hadn't said. "I left because I was scared," she whispered. "I came back because I couldn't stop thinking about how I felt when I was here." Jack didn't say a word. He stood slowly, crossed the space between them, and knelt in front of her. For a second, neither of them moved. The firelight danced across her face, and her breath caught just a little as his hand reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I haven't stopped thinking about you either," he said quietly. And then he kissed her. There were no grand declarations, no promises carved in stone, just lips meeting in warmth and silence. A breath drawn in, and finally, let go. When they pulled apart, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The whispers started small. A glance too long at the grocery store. a cashier's smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Claire felt it like a draft, subtle, chilling, something you noticed only when it slipped beneath your skin. At first, she ignored it. Let the murmurs slide off her like rain. Maple Hollow was a small town. People talked. But as the days passed, the stares lasted longer. The whispers sharpened. Whitmore money always has strings. Think she's just playing house with Jack until the story dies down? Heard she paid off his mortgage. Probably owns the garage now, too. Claire didn't respond, didn't defend herself. She just kept showing up at the garage, at Owen's school drop-offs, at the corner diner, where people paused conversations when she walked through the door. She smiled anyway, left generous tips. Waved when waved to, but behind closed doors, it wore on her. One night, after Owen had gone to bed, Jack found her sitting on the back steps, arms wrapped around her knees, Max resting his head in her lap. "You hear it too," she said without looking at him. Jack leaned against the porch rail, arms folded. "I do. I thought if I came back quietly, if I just lived like anyone else, it would fade. This town remembers everything," he said. "Sometimes longer than it should." She turned to him, eyes shadowed by something deeper than just worry. "I'm not trying to change this place, or you, or Owen. I'm just trying to belong, without having to prove I'm not the headline." Jack didn't answer right away. He stepped down beside her, sitting on the step, knees brushing. "I know who you are," he said. "I knew before the papers, and I know what kind of person you've been since you walked through my garage door." She looked at him, eyes searching. "But do they?" "They will. Eventually. What if they don't?" Jack met her gaze, steady and sure. "Then I'll stand beside you anyway." It wasn't a fairy tale promise. It didn't erase the doubt or silence the rumors. But in a world where most people believed what they read in ink and pixels, Jack believed in what he saw with his own eyes. And that was worth more than all the whispers in the world. The county fair was already in full swing by the time they arrived. Bright lights blinking against the twilight sky, the scent of kettle corn and hay bales thick in the air. Music played from tinny speakers near the tilt-a-whirl, and laughter echoed from the ring-toss booth where someone had just won an oversized stuffed bear. Owen ran ahead, his little legs flying as he pointed to every ride, every booth, every blinking sign. "Can we do the Ferris wheel first?" he shouted, already halfway to the ticket line. Jack chuckled, reaching out to catch Claire's hand before she could follow. She looked at him, a question in her eyes, and he gave her a look so soft, it melted something in her chest. "You okay?" he asked. Claire nodded slowly. More than okay. It wasn't the kind of place she'd grown up visiting. There were no VIP tents, no curated photo ops, no sponsors or brand ambassadors. Just dirt beneath her boots, music in the distance, and the laughter of a boy who felt like he belonged to her in all the ways that mattered. They rode the Ferris wheel, first Owen in between them, gripping both their hands, grinning wide as they rose above the fairgrounds. From the top, the whole town looked like something out of a storybook. Lights blinking like fireflies. The church steeple in the distance. The garage just barely visible past the treetops. Claire leaned into Jack as the car swayed slightly, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulder without hesitation. They played games after that. Claire lost miserably at the milk bottle toss, but beat Jack at the water gun race, much to Owen's delight. They shared funnel cake, powdered sugar catching in the corner of Claire's smile. Jack stole a bite and got scolded playfully. Owen dragged them to the petting zoo, where Max, who'd insisted on tagging along, nearly started a standoff with a goat. By the time the fireworks lit up the sky, Claire had one arm around Owen, the other around Jack. They stood together near the edge of the fairgrounds, faces lit by bursts of gold and red. She didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like an heiress playing pretend. She felt like someone who'd stopped running. Owen leaned into her side and said softly, "This is the best day ever." Jack glanced at her and smiled. "Yeah, it really is." And for the first time in a long, long time, Claire believed it. The press conference wasn't held in a ballroom or a skyscraper boardroom with sweeping views of Manhattan. It wasn't streamed on a stage with branded backdrops or rows of corporate investors nodding in rehearsed approval. It was held in the old town hall of Maple Hollow, under flickering fluorescent lights, with folding chairs and the faint smell of lemon cleaner. A handful of local reporters had made the drive. Some curious townsfolk came too, clutching notepads and coffee cups, whispering behind their hands. Claire stood at the front alone, no legal team, no PR rep, no entourage, just her. She wore a simple blazer over jeans, her hair pulled back, calm, clear-eyed. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady. "I know some of you expected something more polished, more dramatic. But that's part of the reason I'm standing here today." The room was quiet. Cameras clicked softly. "My name is Claire Whitmore. For the past decade, I've been tied to a company that bears my family's name. I was raised in it, expected to lead it. And for a long time, I tried to convince myself I could without losing who I was." She paused, letting her breath settle. "But the truth is, I did lose myself. In the noise, the pressure, the headlines, I became a nameplate, a photo op, a polished version of someone I barely recognized." She looked out over the room, eyes finding Jack in the back row. Owen sat beside him, fidgeting, legs swinging beneath his chair. "I left that world for a while. I didn't know it then, but I was searching for something I hadn't felt in years. Honesty, stillness, something real, and I found it in a town no one expected, in a garage with oil-stained floors, in a boy with stars in his eyes, and in a man who never once asked me to be anything but myself." Her voice softened. "So today, I'm stepping away from Whitmore Automotive, permanently. I've transferred my shares into a trust that supports small-town business grants and community growth programs. Effective immediately, I will no longer serve on the board." A few gasps broke the quiet, but Claire didn't flinch. "I'm choosing peace over power, purpose over profit, love over legacy." She folded her notes, even though she hadn't read them. And then she smiled for the first time that day, not for the cameras or the audience, but for herself. "I'm finally going home." The garage smelled like motor oil, pine cleaner, and just a hint of cinnamon Claire's doing. Jack had teased her the first time she lit that candle near his tool chest, but he never blew it out. Now it was part of the place. Just like she was. She stood near the workbench, wiping her hands on a rag, grease smudged along her jawline, hair twisted up in a messy knot. The sun had started dipping low, slanting amber light through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Jack leaned over the hood of a freshly restored 1972 Chevelle, its paint a deep, glossy midnight blue, engine purring smooth as a whisper. Claire had worked on it with him over the last few weeks, torquing bolts, handing him tools, laughing when she dropped the same wrench 3 times in a row. She'd called it therapy. Jack had just called it Tuesday. "Want to do the honors?" he said, stepping back and nodding toward the engine bay. Claire raised a brow. "What, you want me to start it?" "Nope. Just take a look. Make sure I didn't screw anything up." She grinned, rolling her eyes, and leaned over the open hood, peering into the engine like he'd taught her. Everything looked right. Polished. Perfect. But something sparkled near the intake valvia. Small velvet box nestled just behind a hose clamp, wedged where only someone looking closely would find it. She stilled. "Jack," she whispered, reaching for it with trembling fingers. He stepped beside her, wiping his hands on a rag that was already stained beyond hope. "Figured if I was going to do this, I'd do it somewhere real, somewhere that mattered." She turned to him, eyes wide, lips parted. Jack cleared his throat, suddenly nervous in a way that made her heart ache. "You could have gone anywhere. You had everything. But you came back here. You stayed. With me. With Owen. With all of this." He paused, reached into his back pocket, and pulled out the ring that had once been hidden in the engine simple. Classic, gold warmed from his hand. "I don't need fancy," he said. "I don't need perfect. I just need you." So, Claire Whitmore, will you marry me?" She didn't speak, just nodded, eyes brimming, smile breaking wide and full. Then she kissed him right there in the garage, grease-streaked and breathless, with the scent of motor oil and cinnamon all around. And Jack knew this was the only yes that had ever mattered. The snow fell soft and slow, like feathers shaken from the sky. Maple Hollow had gathered in the little clearing behind the garage, where the trees arched overhead like old friends, and fairy lights blinked gently from the pine branches. A makeshift altar stood at the edge of the woods, draped in flannel and wild greenery, with the faintest touch of frost shimmering along its edge. Claire stood in a simple ivory dress, boots peeking from beneath the hem, her cheeks flushed with cold and something warmer. Jack waited beneath the arch, wearing his best shirt-still flanland, a look that said he couldn't quite believe this was real. Owen stood between them, holding the rings like he'd been training for the role his whole life. There was no orchestra, no flashbulbs, no guest list curated by PR teams. Just the hum of a small town breathing around them, and the scent of wood smoke drifting from the nearby fire pit where Max lay curled beside a pile of spare mittens. The ceremony was short, quiet, honest. When Claire spoke her vows, her voice didn't waver. "I used to think love was something you had to earn, prove you were worthy of. But then I found it in the smallest of things. A cup of coffee, a silent ride through the snow, a man who didn't ask me to change, even when the whole world did." Jack didn't say much. He never had to. "I didn't know I needed you until I almost lost you," he said, looking at her like she was the only thing that had ever made sense. "But you walked back into my life like it was yours all along. And now I can't imagine a single day without you." When they kissed, the crowd clapped, a few cheers rising from the back. Someone popped a bottle of cider. Owen whooped. Max barked once, proud and loud. They celebrated in the garage at Winkle, lights strung above the workbenches, pie on paper plates, music playing from the radio in the corner. Claire danced with Owen until they were both breathless, and Jack watched them with a look in his eyes that said everything his quiet nature never would. Later that night, after the last guests left and the lights dimmed, Jack and Claire stepped outside into the stillness. The snow crunched under their boots. The stars blinked above, cold and bright. Claire looked at the man beside her, his hand warm in hers, and smiled. What had begun with a crash on a frozen road had become something steady. Something rare, not a rescue, a home. And this time the ice didn't break beneath them. It melted,